Hey everybody, happy Sunday. I hope you guys have had a good weekend so far. So let's just go ahead. We'll start off talking about Amazon first for the $500 challenge, why we took that off so quickly this Friday for the quick profit before it ended up bouncing back up with the market. And then, of course, we can talk about SPX, right? See what's happening there in the overall view and what might be going on into next week. And then, if we do have time, if my kids don't wake up from their nap, happy to talk about any other symbols you guys want to look at or maybe do some scans to see what setups are out there. So, hey, Dark Pool Algo, great to see ya. And then MVDA, absolutely. So let's start with Amazon first on the intraday as well as the daily. Let me pull that up here. So I was actually a little bit hesitant to put on this trade Thursday. Actually, I'll just leave this big. And the reason why is it's not to say that Amazon doesn't typically sell off on Fridays. It does. But the few times, right, that you won't see that sell off on Amazon going into a Friday is typically when it sells off during the week, right? If Amazon has had a pretty down week overall, then you might not continue to see that selling on Friday. It might actually be a pause, or maybe you get the bounce, kind of like what we did. So I was a little hesitant to put it on because, as you can see, right, the majority of the week we were continuing to hit resistance and we dropped down off of those levels. And then, of course, Thursday, right, had the huge gap to the downside in a lot of symbols, including the market. And Amazon in particular, we actually, let me zoom in here. As you can see, we hit the ATR trailing stop as support, held that level, and then ended up getting a strong bounce right back up into resistance and made a very nice bullish divergent bar. And on top of that, we actually made a true low with the cherry on top on the daily chart, which was similar to the true lows that we had back here whenever we had that stronger bounce into resistance. And as you can see, right, that price level was around 2,800 that we were holding back here. It's the same price level that we're seeing here. And so the bullish divergent bar, the true low, that was a pretty strong bounce to the upside. So to me, that kind of meant that this could continue higher. But because this was such a strong move, it wouldn't be too surprising to see a little bit of profit taking, especially because it was at resistance that it still held going into the highs of that day. And so maybe we'd get some profit taking first to allow us to lock in those profits. And then, of course, right, everything that's happening globally, anything news-wise could all of a sudden trigger that to be maybe another sell-off day. So I decided to put it on, but I wanted to watch it in the morning to determine whether or not we're going to take potentially a quick profit, maybe even close it for break even, or if we were going to hold on to it a bit longer later in the day. So let's talk about that. So on the intraday charts, and I talked about this at Simpler Trading in the training room whenever it was happening, as well as in the day trading room whenever we were in there. But I mentioned, right, usually we did end up selling off, right? So that followed through. We technically opened below the close of Thursday, so we did see some profit taking occur. But what was happening is on the 5-minute chart in particular, we were running into the ATR trailing stop, and that continued to hold support every time we were going down to that level, right? It kept stalling. The Bollinger Band maintained relatively flat. So if the Bollinger Bands aren't trying to open up and make way for the price, that's usually a sign that they're not anticipating a move in that direction. In this case, the lower Bollinger Band, right, was holding on. It wasn't, the price was kind of knocking on the door and the Bollinger Band wasn't budging. So that was another sign that this might be support before we do end up bouncing and following through with that higher high and that true low, maybe a bit higher in the price, right? And then in line with what was happening on the 5-minute chart, on the hourly chart, it was in line with basically hitting and stalling at this 30-period simple. And so when I saw that that level was holding on the hourly, when I saw it, multiple times with the price hit this level and stalling on the 5-minute chart, I was like, okay, let's just go ahead and close this out. If it does end up moving lower, then so be it. Maybe, some of you guys held on to a runner just in case. But if instead, right, the bounce that we saw from Thursday continued to the upside, and certainly if Amazon decided to follow along in that bounce, I wanted to go ahead and lock that in and bring that capital back into the account. And so, of course, right, what ended up happening is that support did end up winning out, and we ended up overall moving higher and then consolidating some into the close again. So what does that mean on the daily chart? Well, on the daily chart, right, the bullish divergent bar followed through with the higher high. We are trying to break above the moving averages here. We do actually have a bullish signal, which on the compound breakout tool, when you have resistance above you, usually means that you're going up to test a resistance level. We're not too far away from the psychological level of 3,100. But what was interesting about both the move on Thursday and Friday is that it is still technically on weakening momentum here below the zero line, with room for that momentum to continue down. So that's usually a bit more bearish weight when you see it, which means maybe we do start to get a bounce here, but be cautious around psychological levels and be cautious around prior highs, because if you see any sort of stalling there, that could be the sign that we're going to reverse right back down into support. And it could be that we just chop, right? We don't necessarily need to see a bearish move or a bullish move. We could just kind of sit here, chop, and hang out for a bit. So that's always a possibility as well. Hey, Cashman Trading. Oh, Cash Max Trading, great to see you. And Mitzi, hey, I hope you're doing well this weekend. Yeah, it certainly is on Amazon. And to me, right, what looks like it could be trying to happen here is maybe even a W pattern if it gets a stronger bounce to the upside. I don't know. Perhaps, right? On the weekly chart, we've been putting some true low signals, which is what's also been catching my eye on Amazon. It's one of those ones where I'm tempted to start maybe looking bigger picture view bullish again. But it still has weakening momentum. And what I don't like about this right now is that if I was playing this currently, I would only be playing it up into the 100 period simple as resistance. And then I'd probably be taking profits there and then waiting for a break in the 100 to keep playing it higher if that's the direction it goes. And we're right basically at the 100. So it's like, kind of took the quick profit, if you will, and then walked away on that. So we'll see what happens there. Let's go on to SPX now, because I did want to talk about the bigger picture market view. But that is why we took the quick profit on Amazon for the $500 challenge Friday. So ideally, we can find some more SPX trades or maybe something on Monday that cash settles that day to round us out for the month. That's a bit bigger of a profit, right? Amazon was a little one, but I mean, it was okay. It was an okay profit. I think we took, what was it? We jumped into Amazon at $1.30, and then no, is that my close? No, those are my orders. Okay, there we go. We jumped into it at $1.30 and closed out for $1.08. That's what I thought. So it's a quick 50-cent profit, which, on a $500 challenge, it's, 10% of the account returned. So I guess not too bad when you look at it like that. But I would have liked a bit more of that, ideally, right? And then the true low indicator will be released on Simpler at Simpler Trading. It's just I'm actually been preparing slides and working on a class for it. So once the class is released, then we'll be able to release it there as well. But it's one I've been back testing now for quite a while. So it's the idea behind it is to find like the discount price, not just a low in the market, but like a true discount, like a Black Friday sale, right? So that's the thought process. And then yeah, shop, absolutely. We can take a look at that one. And thanks, Mitzi. I appreciate you mentioning that. I just saw you replied. So, let's talk about SPX now. Now, overall, right, this trend on the daily chart has started to turn a little bit bearish, of course, with the simple moving averages. The 10 is below the 30, both are below the 100. We, of course, like I said, just on Amazon, like a lot of things, right? Thursday, we ended up getting that strong gap down, but we bounced up from those levels. And what was interesting about SPX is that we basically, you know, went right back up to 4,300 to try and close at that level for the day. And of course, we know that's where we basically held the last time that we saw the pullback, right? We had a little bit of a dip down to 4,220, but for the most part, 4,300 was attempting to be the support level. And so, we saw a little bit stronger of a dip below it because we actually had a close and open below 4,300 this time. But still, for the most part, it looks like this 4,300 level is still trying to hold. In particular, along with the true low that's trying to print here on the daily, the Bollinger Bands are starting to flatten out some. Now, somebody who works at Simpler Trading, Cody, if for those of you who don't know him, go check him out. He does a lot of dark pool algo stuff, right? He mentioned a lot of heavy buying came in back here on Thursday, about 16 million. Now, when I talked to him on Friday, he said it didn't quite get the same volume of follow through, which could be maybe it's just a sign of short covering, right? Maybe just a move up here. Um, his name's Cody. Right? Who's that? But no, in all seriousness, right? So might not be a stronger bounce, might not be quote unquote the lows. But what was interesting for me, something that I know I've been trying to look for on the indexes for quite some time, is this true low signal to appear on the weekly chart, right? Because what happens is when you start to get into a bit more of a bearish market like this, right? Bollinger Bands on the daily chart start to point lower. They have that bearish sentiment. And so usually what that clues me into is that the discount, price might be based off of a weekly or a monthly time frame, something longer term. We saw that during the pandemic lows back here, right? That true low signal print, haven't seen it since. We had two other times on the weekly chart, which I think my time frame is 5 years. Yeah, so in the last 5 years, we've only seen the signal print about 3 times on SPX. And just to show you guys on the monthly chart, you've only ever seen it during the dot-com lows and during the 2008 housing crisis, right? Haven't seen it since on a monthly time frame. And I'm not anticipating it right now on the monthly either. But what was interesting on the weekly chart is that this did start to print a true low signal whenever we had that selling off on Thursday. Now, we saw such a strong bounce on SPX that it started to disappear on me, which was a little frustrating. For those of you who are on the Profit Recycling Mastery, right, when we were on the mic live with each other going into the close, we were talking about this signal. And so I actually went back to the recording of that video just to show you guys, like, I'm not lying. It was trying to print there for, I guess on Thinkorswim I could have used the on-demand feature and show you guys too. But here's a snapshot of it. It was starting to print whenever we were selling off and then getting that bounce back up on Thursday. The bounce was so strong, though, that the signal started to disappear. So on the weekly chart, right, you do usually see it for a couple bars. So we could still head a little bit lower first. And I do want to recognize that because momentum, certainly still has a long ways to go, right? This is still a bearish setup. We have a squeeze. Maybe that squeeze fires to the downside. There's certainly room to go down and test the 100 period simple, which the 100 period simple on the weekly chart is starting to line up with the next monthly support of the ATR trailing stop, both around 3,900, right? Certainly 4,000 would be a pretty strong psychological level to go and test. And keep in mind, on the monthly time frame, a move down to 3,900, that's not really a bearish trend. That's just a pullback into support. And as I know I've talked about on here, I know I've talked about it at Simpler, I honestly think, and this is kind of, me putting my thoughts on the market. Mind you, the market's going to do it at once, and we'll continue to follow the technicals and play it out that way. But to me, it feels like that this will probably be a pretty choppy year. right? Kind of like what we had back in 2015, 2016, where we don't really see a strong sell-off, right? And I could be wrong about that. We'll continue to play it how it lies. But we don't necessarily see a strong move up. We just consolidate. Consolidation still allows for momentum and other things to reset within the market, right? The technicals. And then from there, we could still bounce and go into a bullish market maybe next year, maybe at the end of this year. So those are some interesting, things there. But that's why don't be too surprised if we did pull back, if those are the levels that we run into, and then, right, potentially hold them. So now SPX was starting to print that true low. Let me switch turns now really quickly just to go over some of the other indexes, right? IndieX has actually started to print this for a few bars now. Similar situation, we had it during the pandemic lows. We had it back here during this dip for, I don't know what happened then in 2019, but for whatever reason, right, that seemed like a discount buy, which, in turn it was. And then, of course, we had it during this 2018 sell-off going into 2019, right? There's a true low then. So we have started to print it once again on NDX, which it is also nicely in line with NDX holding the 100. And of course, for those of you who are like, NDX is ridiculously expensive, totally understand. You might consider playing the Qs. That's what I did Friday. I took a tiny nibble in one of my accounts on a longer term bullish trade. Definitely went out a few months. Definitely kept my risk small because I'm like, once again, who knows what's going to happen globally, which in turn could impact the market. So you got to play it light. But when I see the true low signal and I know I don't get it very often, it's like, okay, let's start testing it out a little bit here and definitely giving ourselves some time on it. So do see that happening. And then we do also have it pulling up in IWM, which of course in turn is RUT, the Russell, and that's been printing here, printed back here, and then printed some there. I'm not as big of a fan of RUT as I am SPX and the Qs, but you do see where it's been printing and how it's been printing again. So like I said, it started to print on SPX and in turn the SPY, but we got such a big bounce that it started to disappear. Maybe that's a sign that we could move a little bit lower still. But what's also interesting, of course, is with this bounce up, we've talked about the Bollinger Bands in regards to Amazon, for example, right on the intraday timeframes, how if they're not really flaring open, it means that they're not necessarily anticipating that move to the downside. Now, of course, that could change within the next bar. But currently, on the weekly chart, these Bollinger Bands have been pretty flat. They did start to flare open whenever we had that gap down, but by the time it bounced back up, they flattened back out. So that to me is a sign that maybe this could be the fake out move. We talked about that last week where we saw a lot on the daily chart last year. The ATR trailing stop broke support, but then that was basically the low, right? It didn't move too much lower. It basically consolidated and then bounced back up. Potentially that's what we're seeing here on the weekly chart. So kind of hard to say at this point. I wouldn't be too surprised if we got at least a pullback if we do see a bounce from this bullish divergent bar, because keep in mind on the weekly chart, this is a bullish divergent bar. We know on Thursday it was trying to print that true low signal with it. So once again, could start to be at least a bounce back up into resistance levels. So maybe we go back up to 4,500, 4,600, right, and test these prior highs. If those levels hold and you were bullish, I would take my profits. Right, I'd probably try and lock those in and then see what call credit spreads, something, a bit more bearish to play back down to potentially 4,300 again, if not lower. And a great way to do that, of course, is with the broken wing butterflies like we've been doing on Amazon, right? Because that way you can play for the idea of potentially around a 4,300 pin. But then at the same time, if it dips like we saw here or even back here well below that level, then you still have the profit potential on a broken wing if it goes completely in the money like that. So the triangle is the cherry on top. It's supposed to help indicate the sweetest entry and the Sunday that is the true low signal. So for example, here on the second one, you got the cherry on top, and that literally was the low of the pandemic on that bar. So that's the idea. And then let's go on to the list. I'm surprised the kids are still out, so I'm all for it. But that's what I'm seeing in the market. So in short, just to round that out really quickly, I do think if this bounce wants to continue into next week, on the daily chart, the next stop is the 30 period simple around 44.50. Um, so of course, we have to break 4,400 as a psychological level, but if we do 4,450 is going to be a mini psychological level, as well as where the 30 period simple is. And then if we can break above that, there's of course 4,500 to be mindful of, but ultimately I'm looking for a move back into the ATR and the hour and the ATR and the 100 period simple moving average. The ATR trailing stops at 45.40 currently, and the 100 period simple is at 45.72. Not too far away from 4,600 and not too far away from these prior highs. The other thing I would keep in mind, right, is if we do get this bounce up into the level and we see a similar bar like we did back here on the 2nd of February or back here on the 9th of February where it starts to break the 100, please don't necessarily use that as I am starting to buy all in, especially if the Bollinger Bands remain flat, right? Because we saw how that was starting to look good. I know there are some people out there that were like, yeah, it looks like things are finally, going to bounce a bit more, right? And that ended up being the high. 4,600 was still respected, and then we started to turn back down here again, similar situation. And then, of course, that's when we went into the new lower low of this recent trend. So just be mindful of that if we do start to break. Now, if you start to see bars really hold that level or it just starts stair-stepping up, then great. Start maybe playing towards 47, 4,800 and, potentially a higher high. I'd be a little surprised if we did start to see that, right? Because we have Fed stuff, interest rates, all that kind of fun stuff sitting in the back for this year. But you never know with this market. It does what it wants. So you just, like I said, play it accordingly. If you start to see the 30 or even the 10 start to hold as resistance, be very mindful of 4,300, right? That has certainly been a level to keep an eye on. If we break below that, then 42.20, actually, that's kind of where these lows were as well, 42.25. The lows on this bar was 42.22. So, that 42.20 level is kind of being respected. Be mindful of that. But certainly if we break below that, then we have the lows of Thursday to be aware of that we could play down into once again. And of course, momentum, like I said, is still kind of bearish, right? We aren't seeing it necessarily build up just yet. And there is room for this to go down to the bottom of the axis. So could potentially see another rollover. So those are the levels I would definitely be watching out there for this week on the market. Thanks, Kayhan. I appreciate it. And then let's go on to, NVDA was up first on the list. So let's go up to that one first. So NVDA is actually one of the ones that I have been trying to watch on the weekly time frame, because this one too has been printing true low signals. And for those of you who have been listening to me nonstop about these, I haven't really been playing too many of the individual symbols with the true low setup. I've been playing a couple, especially like Coca-Cola had one on the 4-hour chart not too long ago. So we did that one in the mastery and took a small profit on that because it's, been holding up a bit better in this market like a honey badger. But a lot of them I've been really trying to be patient on. And the reason why is because when the market's selling off, a lot of things are going to sell off with it, which in turn is good for the true low because it means that we're going to get that bargain deal, right? We're eventually going to find that discount price and where we can buy in at. But the question has to remain though, when will the market stop selling off? So for myself, I've been waiting for those true low signals to try and pop in on the indexes on the weekly time frame, right? Because if I start to see them pop in there and we do start to flatten out, right? If this is really going to sell off, then, maybe I have to wait for the monthly time frame. Like I said, I'm not anticipating that with this market at all. but you never know. Um, I was looking at it for more the weekly chart, so we are starting to see that, right? And so I was waiting for that because if the market's starting to bottom out, then that means it's also a good time to buy the individual symbols. Because of course, if the market starts to bounce, then you're seeing that buying come back in the market. Then you'll start to maybe see it in some more individual stocks, right? Ones that people want to hold, and in turn, that's just confirming the discount price. If you're starting to buy in early and the weekly indexes, weren't showing that true low signal, then you might have to sit through more pain. And, why would we want to do that, right? So let's get the confirmation. Um, so on NVDA, yeah, I'll add SPY to the list. Absolutely. Let me just check the monitor. Okay, we're good. So on NVDA, like I mentioned, we've started to see it back here, print. We saw it once here, right during this pullback before we had the run. We saw it back here as well as back here print, which obviously, right, those were pretty good discount prices in the bigger picture view. So, maybe this is the discount price again. I certainly like how MVDA on the weekly chart has been holding the ATR trailing stop as support. I like the bullish divergent bars that have been printing here as well. I also like that the Bollinger Band's coming up to meet the price. I think that's a pretty good sign because once again, it's not anticipating a sell-off. And the last time we kind of saw this happen back here, well, we saw what happened. We printed a squeeze for one bar and then it basically fired to the upside. So I'm all for that. If I'm in the trade, of course, right? I want to be in it. But I like how everything's looking here. My only concern, once again, is if we do keep reversing, well, I would have to potentially sit through a pullback down to the 100 if this does really want to sell off. Currently, the 100's around 166. So that's about like an 80-point move lower than where we're trading at. So that's what I would want to be mindful of. Ideally, I start to get maybe a bullish signal here. Momentum's technically starting to cross above the zero line, so maybe it starts to pick back up, kind of like what it did here, where it barely crosses below it and then moves above it. Usually that's a consolidating to bullish sign. So if I got that here, when we've pulled back, are consolidating, and then I start to get that on momentum, right? That's kind of confirming what we're seeing here with a potential bounce back up. And, keep in mind, of course, you have to be mindful, like resistance is at 250. So if we start to stall around 10, maybe up to 270 with these prior highs here, if we start to stall there, I could still be in chop for a bit. And then, of course, if we move up to there, could just be a move up towards 300 or the prior highs around 325, 350. Once again, the Bollinger Bands are still flat up here, so still looks like chop overall, but if I were to look at this as a consolidated range, we're definitely near support compared to resistance. So I like MVDA. It's been one, that I've been keeping an eye on here for a bit. I played a short move back during this true low up into resistance, and I'm so happy I locked in my profit before earnings because that came right back down into support, so it held out. So, that's the only thing I'd be mindful of there. Otherwise, just I'd say give yourself plenty of time because if you have to sit through a break, then you're going to have to sit through a break. Unfortunately, guys, my daughter just got up, so that is all I'm going to be able to cover today. If you're in the simpler trading rooms, happy to cover shop and SPY next week. If you want to also know the analysis on SPY, Kayhan, just rewatch the analysis on SPX and then, put the levels as you would for SPY because those are pretty similar. But as always, guys, may the trade be with you. We'll look for more $500 challenge trades next week, and I'll talk to you next Sunday. Bye, guys.